Evening, everybody. Part 33 of Finding Your Path, our exploration of Mesilas Yesharim by Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. We are in the middle of chapter Yud Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph 11, which explores the Midah, the character trait of Nekiut, which means cleanliness. As we said before, when a person comes to cleanse himself from sins, he has to go through the first level, so to speak, of I guess you call it a rough and ready clean out. He does the best he can, but then he has to go with a feather duster and a fine-tooth comb and examine all of the things that he's doing. And the Mesilas Yesharim goes into not all the areas that are possible for a person to come adrift from the Ratzon of Hashem. But many of these ideas, many of these situations in which a person can fall foul of what the Torah says he has to do. And the one we're going to deal with tonight is giving advice. As it says, and we're starting where it says, Inyan Nesinas Eitzah, with regard to giving advice to people. Shanina b'Toras Kohanim. We learned in Toras Kohanim, which is a medrash in Vayikra, V'lifnei iver lo sitein michshol. The pasuk says, in front of a blind man, do not place a stumbling block. The Medrash understands this not just literally, but also figuratively. V'fnei suma b'dova, somebody who is blind in a certain thing. You can trip somebody up in various ways, not physically. You can do things which will be an impediment for their success. You can do things, God forbid, which may cause them all kinds of damage to their reputation, to their health even. For example, somebody asks you, is this particular girl fit for a Kohen? A Kohen, the priestly class amongst the Jewish people, are on a very elevated spiritual level, and there are certain restrictions as to who a Kohen could marry, which would not necessarily be restricted to a Levi or a Turi Israel. So says the Mesilas Yesharim, don't say Alta Maloi Kasherahu, she's kosher. V'hi eino ela psula, and she really is apostle. That's a way of putting a stumbling block in front of somebody, because a Kohen may not marry, for example, a Gioris. There was a case actually, Derech Agav. It's not really, it's an interesting story by itself to see how the vision of Gedolei Yisrael, a rather sad story that I heard about from Rabbi Michael Shon many years ago, and it must be 20 years ago. And this is something that comes up, I know it's not all the time, but something which is probably more common in a place like Or Sameach. For example, you have a boy who becomes from and he's a Kohen. Now, a Kohen can't marry a Gioris. A Kohen also can't marry a Jewish girl if she's had a non-Jewish boyfriend. Yeah. So this is something that the story went that he was here and he met a very nice girl. She was in Neve, I think, and she did tshuva. I don't remember if she was a Gioris. I'm not sure she was a Gioris or she was somebody who had a non-Jewish boyfriend. She wasn't mutter to a Kohen. But he was told, his father told him he was a Levi. But Rav Shon got wind of the fact that he was a Levi, but they had this tradition in the family that they should never go into a graveyard. Now a Levi can go into a graveyard, a Kohen can't. A Kohen can't matame himself to a mason. And so he didn't know what to do. He took the shaila to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zechus Livrocha, and he passed in that he was a Kohen. He says, Kohen, Levi, that's something amongst non-religious people can get muddled up. But the fact that you don't go into a graveyard is something which can't be confused. A sad story. But let's say, for example, we're talking about it here, a situation where somebody deliberately gave somebody bad advice. He knew this girl was not mutter to a Kohen, and she said he was. Another case.
Maybe the rabbi just looked at him and said he's not a Levi, he's a Kohen?
No, he said that based on the circumstantial evidence that the family had this tradition, they shouldn't go into graveyards. That was more compelling evidence that they, in point of fact, were Kohanim. Enough to say that he shouldn't marry this girl. I mean, he married somebody else. It's not as though, but on the other hand, that was only a Godel can see that. The logic is clear, but it takes a Godel B'Yisrael to be able to make a decision like that. Yeah. Okay, so somebody comes and he comes to ask you for advice in a certain thing. Don't give him advice which is not suitable for him. Now this is very important. One of the things that's important when you give somebody advice is not just that the advice should be in a general fashion a good piece of advice, because what's good for somebody may be absolutely terrible for somebody else. So you have to know, if you're prepared to get up and give somebody advice, you have to know them very well. Not just to know that in general this is a good thing, but to know this is suitable for this person. Now he says a slightly less subtle case. Don't say to him, sell your field and buy a donkey. You see from this, I guess in those days land was much cheaper and livestock was much more expensive. Seems to be some kind of equivalence there. Anyway, don't say that to him, because why? Why are you telling him to sell his field? Because you've got your eye on the field. And what you really want to do is to get him to sell it because you want to buy the field. That's a very obvious case of giving bad advice. Now, you might say, Shema Toima, maybe that's actually a good thing. Maybe he's going to make a good deal out of that. Maybe he'll make some money out of selling his field and buying this donkey instead. And maybe you'll be able to justify that to yourself and say, I'm giving him a good piece of advice. Hare hadava musal, whereas this literally the thing is given over to the heart, meaning deep down inside you know that you're not giving him that advice because it's a good piece of advice, it's because you've got your own interest in it. You should fear Hashem. The person should have Yirah Shamayim. He should realize that Hashem is seeing exactly what's going on in his mind. And they say you can fool, all of the people, some of the people, and some of the, all of the people some of the time, and some of the people, all the people some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time, and you can never fool Hashem, ever. Nim says Lamedim, so we see from that, Shebein b'davar sheyochol liyos nogea boy, Ubein b'davar she'eino nogea boy klal, chayev adam, whether it's something which pertains to you, something which you have an interest in it, or something you have no interest in it at all. Chayev adam lahamid es haba lisyoit boy al ha'emes hazoch v'haboro. If somebody comes to ask advice from you, it has to be pure, the truth, and clear. V'tireh she'amda ha'torah al sof daitem shel rumoyim. The Torah sees to the depth of what goes on in the minds of a trickster. The love, when we talk about tricksters here, we're not talking about the shuftone askinon. We're not dealing with shutfoni. I don't know how to translate it there. It's like tricksters, coarse, obvious fraudsters. And how does he translate them? Shutfoni.
The Torah knows very well how swindlers.
Swindlers, okay. So swindler, we're not dealing, when we're not talking about swindlers, obvious swindlers here. She'etza esa she'ra'asa mufusemes v'nigleis. We're not talking about obvious swindlers here who, we're not talking about people who do these card tricks on the street or with these dice and which cup is the dice under. We're not talking about people like that, that's obvious. Ela ba'hachamim lahara, rather people who are sly, who are clever at being evil. That ostensibly seems like very good advice. And as we said before, it really could be something which is good for his chaver. But in the end of the day, this person knows that it's not going to work out for the best. Maybe he knows like there's a share on the stock market that's going to go up, but he also knows, and it's going to be like a short-lived thing, but he knows that at the end of the day, the company is basically weak and he's going to be in trouble. Ki im l'rosoi lahanoso shel hayoitz al kain rather, ki im l'roso, it's going to be his bad, and it's going to be lahanoso shel hayoitz, to the benefit of the person who's giving this advice. Al kain omru. That's why Chazal say, Shemato ma'etza yofa chule. Maybe you'll say it's good advice. It's good advice in the short term, but in the end, it's not going to be good for him, and it's going to be good for you. Arei hadava musal alev. That's something that deep down you know while you're giving this advice. Don't try and fool yourself and justify yourself. V'kama nichsholim b'nei odom ve'ela hachatoim yom yom. How many people stumble in these matters, in these sins, every day. B'yosem kruyim v'holchim l'sochef chemdas habetza. Because they are, and unfortunately, this is so true nowadays, people are looking to make money. And when it comes to making money, people have very blinkered eyes. They can justify many, many things for themselves, which they should understand that Hashem knows what's going on. Hashem, v'yira elokecha, yirasim elokecha, you should fear Hashem. Hashem sees into your heart of hearts. Gavayz bara godel onsha, and we already know the great punishment because of, as it says in Devarim, oror mashke iver b'derech. Cursed is the one who misleads the blind man on the road. And again, on the road is something which is not necessarily literal. The road that you want him to go down. Thus, rather, this is the obligation of somebody who's straight. Somebody comes to ask you for advice. You have to give that person the same advice that you would give to yourself. Without any kind of regard, only for the benefit of the person seeking the advice, and we're going to see even if that may be to your detriment. Lo l'shum tachlis acher, and for no other purpose or interest whatsoever except the benefit of the person who's seeking your advice. Korov or rochog sheyeh, whether it be something which is a distant, other, what they call it nowadays, another agenda, how they call it, a side agenda, whether that's something which is very close or something which may happen in the future. Everything has to be clean, 100%. You do the advice is purely and simply for that particular person, the best thing for him. As I mentioned, it could be that somebody comes to you to ask for an advice. I don't know, just off the top of my head, some situation. Let's say that you have a daughter, and you know there's a bocher in yeshiva that you got your eye on, who thinks this is a very good boy for your daughter. And somebody else comes and says, tell me, what do you think of this bocher? I'm thinking it'd be a good match for my daughter. So, what are you going to do in that situation? So, im yochol lahochiach al ponav shel hamisyayitz yochiehu. So you have to. I think the way I translate it is if it's possible to reveal that you have an interest in it, you have to have an interest. You have to reveal that interest. You have to say, look, I can give you advice in this situation, but I have to tell you, what do they call it in the light of full disclosure. I have to tell you that you have to understand that I've also got an interest in this, and so therefore I have to tell that before you give me my advice. Now that doesn't mean that the advice may not be good advice, but you have to declare your interest. Now I could well be, and I'm trying to think maybe you can help me with a situation, as he goes on to say, V'im yochol, v'im lo, and if you can't advise him, make this full disclosure, yistalik min hadavar, v'lo yisatzeu, you have to withdraw and not give him advice. You have to say, I'm very sorry, I can't give you advice in this situation.
Even because you have an interest?
Because you have an interest, or because there's something that you know that and I'm trying to think, that's what I think, I'm not quite sure of a situation where you have an interest in it, or there's something which makes it that you are not in a position to give this totally objective, advice, and you can't reveal the reason why that is.
Because advice, let's say, involves you, right?
Involves you. I'm thinking of a situation, or something, maybe it reveals something about you, or something about your business dealings that you can't really tell them. Maybe it's a secret, somebody trusted you with a secret.
No, let's say somebody asks me about a girl, right? They want to go on a date with her or whatever, and let's say I've been through this girl and I've been on a date. I know something about this girl that he doesn't know about.
Yeah, you're saying a situation where you went out with a girl and now somebody comes to ask you whether to go out with her, and you know something about her that it's not totally 100%. And you don't want to give him the eitzah to say don't go out with her.
Right.
Yeah, that's probably a situation where you say, I'm sorry, you have to ask somebody else.
Right.
But you also have to be careful in the way, because you say you have to somebody ask somebody else. That also could be like a negative.
Right.
You know, you have to be careful. You say, I'm sorry, I think you better ask somebody else about that. Like that's already.
Or you say, I don't know, honestly.
Or you just say, you know,
Sure.
Yeah, it is very tough. That's what exactly saying it. It's very difficult. Giving advice is very, very difficult. And even when you come to say to somebody, I can't give you advice, you can say it in such a way that, God forbid, that comes out as being advice. And you're really saying, you know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You know, I'm not going to say anything, but So, again, even when you exclude yourself from giving advice, you have to do it in a very clever way. You could say, I don't know, maybe it's even mutter to lie in such a case, and to say, I'm sorry, I don't know her well enough to give you advice.
What if he asked like a specific thing about this girl, like was she ever like, you know what I mean? And I know, let's say.
So, if you know something that's damaging about, so let's say somebody comes to you and they're telling you they're going to go into business with this guy called, Bernie Thug, who's just got out of Wormwood Scrubs prison out in northwest London, and you're starting a trust fund with this guy or something, and you know that this guy's an out and out, so you have a duty to reveal that. Now, exactly what you can say and how you can say it are subject to the laws of Lashon Hara, and that's why a person should learn the laws of Lashon Hara, because you can't just say, this guy's an out-and-out scoundrel, and you have to say in such a way, you say, I think maybe you should check further into him, or something like that. Again, all of these things require study, and I'm not sure in such a situation, if you know something which is definitely going to be damaging for this person, that you can step inside and say, ask somebody else. I think in such a situation, if you know that there's a definite sakana to this person, I think you're mechuyev to rescue him within the laws of Lashon Hara, to make sure that he checks very thoroughly into his Bernie Thug. Okay, and really this is touching on what we said before. You can only, if somebody comes to ask you advice, as we said, it has to be totally for the benefit and for the guy who's coming to ask you for advice. However, if the person who's coming to ask you for advice is asking him this advice because he wants to mess somebody else up, then you have a mitzvah to mess him up. Then you can certainly mislead him, and you should mislead him. Let's say he wants advice how to swindle this little old lady's fund out of a few $1 million, and he says, look, I've got this idea and I could do this. What do you think? It's a good idea. So
I could swindle him now, basically.
Yeah. Well, you should definitely make it that he's not going to succeed. Let's see what he says. Im lo shekavanasa hamisyah it's l'ra, provided that the intention of the person who's come for the Eitzah is not to do evil. She'oz vadai, then certainly mitzvah laramoiso. It's a mitzvah to trick him. To trick him, laramoiso, to trick him up.
Succeed.
So he won't succeed. Ukavar ne'amar, as it says, v'im ikesh titapol, if with the crooked be cunning. That's a posuk in Shmuel. V'chushai ha'arki yochiach, and chushai ha'araki proves this to be true, that you can and you must give false advice, mislead somebody if you know that their intention is evil. And he says here in the notes, who's chushai ha'araki? It's in Shmuel, it's a story of Shmuel. Shenosan l'Avshalom Eitzah lo nechoina, that he gave Avshalom. Avshalom was plotting against David HaMelech, and he gave him bad advice. You know, he said like David's army is over here when it was over. I don't know exactly the exact details, but he as I say, he messed him up. He gave him bad advice. Ubekach itzil es chayov shel David Melech Yisrael, and by that way he managed to save the life of David. So for sure, it's a mitzvah if you know somebody's going to come to do something evil, to mislead them and to trick them. Okay, so we're now finished with the matter of giving advice. Let's move on to the next subject, which is Rechilas and Lashon Hara. So as we said once before, there are 3 levels to Lashon Hara. Lashon Hara is like a catch-all term, but it really has 3 components. The least serious is something called Rechilas. Rechilas is basically tale-bearing. It's just tattle. Telling, the idea is like a rochel. A rochel is a traveling salesman. Somebody who buys his wares over here and he travels and he sells his wares somewhere else. So similarly, a rochel buys his wares, so to speak. He assembles the gossip of a certain town, or and he goes over to some other place and he offloads his gossip some other place. That's damaging because he can say damaging things, but without any kind of malice or forethought. There's no evil intention. Lashon Hara is to say something which is true, but with the intention to denigrate somebody. And what do you call it? Forgotten the third one. Lashon Hara and Motzi Shemra is to try to cause damage to somebody with a false report. Those are the 3 levels, each one worse than the...
What was the first one again?
The first one is Rechilas. Rechilas is basically saying negative stuff, just taking gossip from one place to another, even though the intention is not to denigrate people.
Not direct.
Right. It's just, somebody who just like peddles
Just like it for fun,
gossip, just gossip, even though it could be very damaging.
That's the worst.
No, that's the least worst.
At least worst.
The middle level is Lashon Hara, is where the intention is to damage, but what you're saying is true. And the worst level is where the intention is to damage by saying something which is a lie.
What's it called?
Motzi Shemra, to literally bring out a bad name. And in point of fact, secular law really only recognizes that worst level, right, as being evil. I mean, for sure the newspapers are full of rechilas, of gossip. In point of fact, I think one of them was the New York Times or something used to have on the front, all the news that's fit to print. And somebody crossed it out and just left it, all the news that fits. So, people read newspapers. Why? Because they want to hear gossip, and papers thrive on that. They get into trouble when it gets to be Motzi Shemra. If somebody slanders somebody, that's what it's called in secular terminology, to give somebody a bad name with something which is not true. That you can get into trouble for. But anything else, if it's true, this is something when people start learning Lashon Hara, they go, but Rabbi, it's true. It doesn't matter if it's true. What is the intention? If the intention is negative, then it's asa. Again, it could be a situation where you're mechuyev to speak quote-unquote Lashon Hara to save somebody from the... Okay, exactly. Excuse me. So, Rechilas v'Lashon Hara. Rechilas, tale-bearing, tittle-tattle, and Lashon Hara, speaking badly of people, kava chomro nodad. Their severity is already well known. For godel anofov ki rabu ma'oid. And great are their branches, because it's very covers a lot of different areas in speech. And Shekava goes through Oimer Chazal, the Maimah Shekava Hizkarti. As Chazal have already pointed out, as we pointed this out earlier in the Sefer, as it says, Rubam begesel, miut be'arayas, v'kulam be'avak lashon hara. Everybody stumbles in avak lashon hara. Now, what's avak lashon hara? V'omer says in Erechin, heichidami lashon hara. What is lashon hara? Kagon, da'oma heicha mishtakach nura ela be'plania. Where can you find a light at this time of night? Let's say in the middle of the night. Where can you find fire? And you can get it, where can you get it? In Be'plania, in a certain person's house. Now what's the Lashon Hara here? So it says in Erechin, in Taf Tes Vav Amud Beis, Rashi's explanation over there, that it's talking about a rich person who lives in this place, Be'plania, the house of Ploni, and all the time you can find fire there in this house. Why? Because they're cooking food all the time. So Amalei Abaya, Micah Ovid, Lui, Milsa Ba'almahu. So why is that when you say that you can get why is that called Lashon Hara? You're just informing him that you can get a fire in this particular place because they're cooking all the time there. Ella, the Mapik Belishna Bisha, because really he's doing it in a way to bring out a bad name on this guy. Doma Heiche Mishtach Nura, where can you find fire? Ela Be'plania, Deika Bisra V'Kivuri, because there's meat and fish, meaning Eina Mechusa Klum, they are living it up over there and they don't give it to other people. It's a subtle form of Lashon Hara. That's avak lashon hara. That's not saying anything directly bad about them, but the implication that comes off that is lashon hara. Oh, sheyasaper tovoso lifnei sonov. Now this is a very interesting idea. Another form of lashon hara is to praise somebody in front of somebody that you know dislikes this person. You know for a fact that whatever he's done him down in business or whatever, and you say, wow, you know, this guy just made a fortune on the stock exchange. That's an issa. V'chol kayotze b'zeh. Afal pi shenirim devarim kalim. Even though these things seem to be like very light matters, v'rechokim min ha'rechilus, and very far away from speaking badly about people, from gossip, if you like. Hinei be'emes, behold, in truth, me'avak shalo heim. They are avak lashon hara. They are the dust, literally, of lashon hara. Okay, so what's the general principle? Klal shel dava. Harbe drachim liyetza. The yetzer hara has many, many routes, many ways to get at you. Aval kol davar sheyuchal lizvoled mimenu nezek or bizoyon lechaveru. The general principle is that anything that it's possible to engender as a result of you saying this or revealing this, any kind of damage, physical damage, emotional damage, damage to his reputation, or embarrassment or disgrace, that you reveal something about his family, his parentage, his something in his past that he doesn't want revealed and it's for no purpose. Bein b'fonov, whether you do that in front of this person or behind his back, harei ze b'chlol lashon hara. That's all called lashon hara. Hasnui, which is hated, misoev, and is despised, flei hamokim, in front of Hashem. Shnei Ma'alav says in the pasuk, kol ha'masaper lashon hara. Anybody who speaks lashon hara, ki'ilu kofer be'ika. It's as though he's denied the existence of Hashem. Ukra ksiv, and it says in the pasuk as well, milashoni b'seisa reihu oisoi atzmis, excuse me, from those people who speak lashon hara about his fellow in secret, I will cut him down.
Let's say there's a situation where like Somebody just told you a story about like it's whatever, like a spider bit him and it got him like traumatized or whatever.
So sorry, say it again.
A spider bit him, right, and he got traumatized or whatever, and he basically told me like a whole story about like, or he told me a story about something, and then the other like his friend comes to the door and like, yo, did he ever tell you about the story that he got traumatized about this spider that bit him? And then he goes like, no, he never told me. And that's him right in front of the guy.
Yeah, but that's making him look like a liar. That's lashon hara. That's causing an embarrassment or
That's an embarrassment. So
yeah. It's kind of that. Okay, very good. We'll meet you next week, Bezrat Hashem. We'll take a pause here. Okay. Next week, sorry?
Be'ezrat Hashem.
Bezrat Hashem. Next week we're going to talk about Sina, revenge, and Nakama and Natira.